Hey guys, Dr. G. Today we're going to talk about distributing and promoting products. And when we talk about channels of distribution or marketing channels, it's every step along the way from where a product is manufactured to where it reaches into the consumer's hands. And middlemen or marketing intermediaries are steps that take place between the producer and the ultimate user. And when we talk about channels, the direct channel means that there's no intermediary. So most service producers, if I go to get my hair cut, the person who's cutting my hair is the producer and I'm the consumer. There's nobody in between us. So usually service goods rely on producer to consumer channels. And there are also some manufacturing products that also do, and the book gives some examples of those. The next model would be producer to retailer to consumer. So when you have, say, the big box retailers like Walmart, where the producers sell directly to those retailers because they can buy them in large quantities. Not all retailers can buy in large quantities, as I'll get to in a slide or two. So usually bulky products where there might be extra charges for handling, for shipping, and so forth, are sold producer to retailer to consumer. So in this case, the retailer is the intermediary. In the next model, we're sort of adding another element to the mix, so it's producer to wholesaler to retailer to consumer. And this is kind of the traditional channel, and usually we use this type of scenario when the products that are being produced are carried by a boatload of retailers, so a producer can't manage the relationships with that many retailers, so instead, the producer manages a handful of relationships with wholesalers, and then the wholesalers deal with the multiple relationships with the retailers. In the business consumer market, it works pretty much the same way. Usually, it's producer to organizational buyer, or sometimes there's a producer to agent middleman to organizational buyer, depending on what the nature of the product or service is. And when we talk about market coverage, you can sort of see it varying along a continuum. The intensive distribution means that if there's a place that you can get to carry your product, you use it. Selective distribution means that only some retailers will carry your product. Maybe it's a specialty item, maybe it's something high-end, so not a lot of retailers are going to carry it. And sort of on the far end of the spectrum is exclusive distribution, and that's where you see, available only at blah, blah, blah. So it's a particular arrangement that the producer has with the retailer that that retailer is the only retailer in a given geographic area that carries the product. And it could be that it's because it's a high-end product. So, for example, Hartman luggage you can only buy at Hartman stores, which are usually in most oh gosh, what do you call those things? Outlet malls. And so that would be one example of exclusive distribution. Another example might be just that you have a particular relationship with a particular retailer, and that retailer, because of your special relationship, is willing to carry your product, and maybe you make some arrangement that they'll be the only one. That way consumers are attracted to go to that retailer because that's the only place that sells the product. So when we talk about supply chain management, it's usually a long-term partnership. I mentioned before on the previous slide, you have a special relationship with a retailer, and supply chain management is really about managing the relationships from being the producer to the relationships that you might have with a wholesaler or a retailer, and the relationships between wholesaler and retailer, so on and so forth. So it's long-term partnerships, and through these long-term partnerships, you're usually able to negotiate some better deals, or maybe even make special arrangements where typically as a producer, you don't pay shipping costs for your products to reach the wholesalers, but maybe if you have a long-term partnership with a particular wholesaler, you might be willing to do that. You might be willing to offer better interest rates and so forth on your products, etc. So why do we even have wholesalers? I mentioned before, certainly you can, as a producer, go straight to the retailer and have the retailer sell it, or you can sell directly to your consumers. So why have these middlemen, or middle people, I guess is the gender neutral term, right? They actually do perform critical services because the record keeping involved, as I mentioned before, if you have a lot of retailers selling your product, the record keeping involved in just billing cycles for 50 retailers kind of starts to get out of hand. So if you just have one wholesaler that's managing those 50 relationships, that's a lot easier for you. In addition, sometimes there's economies of scale. Wholesalers often will store your products, because realize if you're a manufacturer, you only have so much space in your manufacturing plant. And a lot of that space is allocated towards manufacturing because that's what you do. So you need to, store the products somewhere before they're actually sold to consumers. I mean, imagine an auto manufacturer. There's only so much space that you can take up with cars, because cars are big items. So wholesalers take up some of that space, take up some of the slack space. And the next slide gets into wholesaler services to retailers, because they also provide a service to retailers as well. Sometimes they can provide financial incentives for retailers. Hey, I realize you as a retailer have pretty heavily stocked shelves. We can store the products here for a while and help manage your inventory so that you get the product when you need it on your shelf, and not before then when you don't have space to show it to consumers. And likewise, they provide services to manufacturers as well. Sometimes it actually creates almost like an instant sales force, because the wholesalers want to sell the product too. So that's almost like, boom, you've got your own sales force right there. And to some extent, they assume some of the credit risks associated with selling to retailers. In the past 10 years or so, the retail industry has not been doing all that well. So large retailers have been in some financial difficulty, so their ability to pay has sometimes been compromised. And if you use a wholesaler, the wholesaler absorbs that risk rather than you as the retailer, because you've already sold it to the wholesaler by that point. So retailers, you want to maintain a good relationship with retailers, because that's kind of the final connection to the consumers. Right. So, when you go to Giant and buy your groceries, usually the only people that you see are the people that work for the retail establishment. So you want to maintain a good relationship with them as well. And the next couple of slides get to classes of in-store retailers. And I do want you to go over these, but there's a lot of them, so I'm not going to go over all of them. Most of them you would probably be familiar with just from having lived 20-ish or more years of life and having been to a variety of different types of stores. Okay, so when we talk about distribution or physical distribution, it's all of the activities that get the product from the manufacturing room floor to the ultimate consumer. And that includes some of the processes I've talked about so far, retailing, wholesaling, so forth. But it also includes shipping. It includes if you're shipping something internationally, your product has to go through customs before it can land in foreign soil. Managing that process is a little more tricky than most people give credit to. So having somebody in the loop that is familiar with that is pretty important. Oops, sorry, I got too far ahead of myself. So moving on, switching gears to marketing communication. We've talked about distribution, now we're getting into communication a little bit. Marketing communications is the entirety of efforts that are used to promote the product or service to have the maximum impact on consumers. It includes advertising, it includes direct sales, it includes public relations, it includes a variety of different efforts that communicate the seller's message to the ultimate consumer. So when we talk about, if you remember earlier in the semester, we talked about the 4 Ps, which the book describes as 3 Ps and a D, the D being distribution, which I've always learned as place, as many other books talk about it. But one of the Ps is promotion, and that includes advertising, it includes personal sales, because sometimes products are complex and you need somebody on the sales floor. So if you're buying a smartphone, for example, typically you don't go in the store knowing exactly what you want. It's a complex product. You need somebody to help guide you through what the features are and how product A differs from product B and so forth. Sales promotions, and that includes products being put on sale. It includes coupons. It includes anything used as an inducement to get people to buy. Or to get salespeople to sell. So, for example, I've waited tables before when I was in college and grad school. At certain given nights, there would be promos that if you sold X number of bottles of a certain wine, you would get a reward that night. That's another type of sales promotion. And public relations, which are used not specifically necessarily to market a particular product, but just to develop a relationship between the organization and the consuming public. So it could be that they announce that they have a new product, but it can also be, hey, we're aiding in efforts to help relief in Flint, Michigan by providing bottled water or something like that to communicate to the consumer. Nothing about their products per se, but just, we're a good socially conscious organization and we care about the community. In terms of developing an advertising campaign, you start off by identifying who it is that you want to be selling to, and then figure out what are the objectives of the advertising. Are we looking to just get familiarity with our brand? Are we looking to get people to buy right away? Are we getting people to compare our product to a competitor's product, etc.? And then we got to figure out what the advertising platform is. Are we going to use TV? Are we going to use internet advertising? The advertising appropriation, the media plan, so how often we're going to show it, if we're showing it on TV, during what television shows are we going to show it, and what's the message we want to convey, and baby puppy monkey or something, I don't know, puppy baby monkey, whatever it was during the Super Bowl this year, that was just, that was the message. I never really got it. And then we need to evaluate the campaign. Is it actually doing anything? Are consumers associating that advertisement with our company, and are they remembering what the content of the advertising was? Advertising agencies are usually independent, outside of the organization, and they create the ads for their clients. They create the message, and sometimes they'll also do the marketing research to determine what might be the most appropriate specific, say if we're talking about newspapers, which newspapers and what pages of the newspapers for our particular consumer audience might be most appropriate. There's a lot of legal and social implications of advertising. So on the one hand, it is the most effective way to reach a large audience, but there are a lot of constraints over what you can and cannot do in advertising in the United States in particular, in terms of false advertising and creating false claims and so forth that manufacturers or producers need to be aware of. Personal selling, we sort of forget about that in the day and age of, instant gratification and internet advertising. But personal selling is the most adaptable method. It's also the most expensive, and I think that's partly why we see less and less of it. But for example, if I have a particular product, I guess one thing that comes to mind is some of you know that I'm a P90X trainer, and P90X is sold. You can go to Beachbody's website and buy it directly, or you can contact somebody who is a coach with Beachbody, and they can sort of give you a more personalized presentation and sort of walk you through the programs and so on and so forth, and sell it that way. Likewise with Avon, you could do the same thing. You could go to their website, or they also rely on personal selling, so that people who are satisfied with the product can talk it up to other people who may be interested in it and sell it that way. I'm not going to get into the 6 steps of personal selling because I'm almost out of time. One of the keys in managing personal selling is motivating and compensating salespeople. What is in it for them to be involved in personal selling? It is hard work managing those relationships. I'm going to end it here. There's a handful of slides left that I'm going to leave to you to go on your own. Have a great week. Take care. Bye.